I'll defend you." The poor beggar saved the Arab billionaire after his lawyer left him in court. Before we continue, please comment on which part of the world you are watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan, its golden rays reflecting off the glass towers that housed some of the world's most powerful corporations. Among them stood the gleaming headquarters of Al-Mansouri Holdings, a real estate empire that had transformed skylines across 3 continents. At its helm sat Rashid Al-Mansouri, a man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms from Dubai to New York, whose signature could move millions, and whose vision had built cities where once there were deserts. But today none of that mattered. Today Rashid found himself walking up those courthouse steps not as a conqueror of commerce, but as a defendant fighting for his life, his legacy, and his freedom. The accusations had come like a thunderbolt from a clear sky: corruption, bribery, conspiracy to defraud the government. The media had been relentless, painting him as just another wealthy criminal hiding behind expensive suits and political connections. His board of directors had distanced themselves, investors had fled, and now, as he approached the moment that would determine his fate, even his own legal team seemed to be wavering. Nearby, unnoticed by the swarm of reporters and legal professionals, a small figure huddled against the cold stone of the courthouse wall. Sophia, just 5 years old, wrapped her thin arms around her knees as she watched the chaos unfold. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face gaunt from hunger, but her eyes burned with an intelligence that seemed far older than her years. She had been living on these streets for months now, ever since her world had crumbled around her when she had tried to speak the truth about the corruption she had witnessed. As Rashid passed by, neither he nor the little girl realized that their lives were about to intertwine in the most extraordinary way, and that justice would come from the most unexpected source. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Rashid Al-Mansouri took his seat at the defendant's table. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like the desert heat of his homeland. Around him, reporters scribbled notes furiously, while photographers captured every angle of what many believed would be the fall of one of the most successful Arab entrepreneurs in America. Judge Margaret Harrison called the court to order, her stern gaze sweeping across the packed courtroom. "The state of New York versus Rashid Al-Mansouri," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of voices. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, you stand accused of conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and fraud in connection with the Hudson River Development Project." Rashid's attorney, Marcus Wellington, had been his legal counsel for over a decade. Wellington and Associates was one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, with a track record of defending high-profile clients. But as Rashid glanced at his lawyer, he noticed something unsettling: beads of sweat on Wellington's forehead despite the air conditioning, nervous fidgeting with his papers, and most troubling of all, the way he avoided eye contact. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case. District Attorney Rebecca Chen stood before the jury with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the winning cards. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and authoritative, "the evidence will show that Mr. Al-Mansouri systematically corrupted city officials to secure favorable zoning permits for his luxury development project. He offered bribes totaling over $50 million to bypass environmental regulations and displace low-income families from their homes." As Chen continued her opening statement, detailing alleged offshore accounts, secret meetings, and forged documents, Rashid felt the walls closing in around him. Each accusation was carefully crafted, each piece of supposed evidence presented with devastating precision. The worst part was that some of the claims contained grains of truth twisted into something sinister. Yes, he had met with city officials. Yes, he had made campaign contributions. But everything had been legal, transparent, and above board. Wellington finally stood to present the defense's opening statement, but his voice lacked conviction. "My client is innocent of these charges," he said, but even to Rashid's ears, the words sounded hollow. "Mr. Al-Mansouri is a respected businessman who has always operated within the law." During the first recess, Wellington pulled Rashid aside in the corridor. "We need to talk," he said, his face pale. "I've been getting calls all morning. Political pressure. They want me to step down from your case. What are you saying?" Rashid's voice was steady, but inside, panic was beginning to set in. I'm saying that representing you right now is career suicide. The mayor's office, the governor's people, they all want to see you go down. If I continue as your attorney, my firm will lose half its clients." Wellington loosened his tie, avoiding Rashid's piercing gaze. "I'm sorry, Rashid. I truly am. But I have to think about my family, my business. You're abandoning me. Now, in the middle of the trial." Wellington nodded reluctantly. "I'll file a motion for continuance so you can find new representation, but I can't do this anymore." As Wellington walked away, Rashid stood alone in the courthouse corridor, watching his future crumble before his eyes. The man who had built an empire, who had negotiated with presidents and prime ministers, suddenly found himself completely powerless. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was surrounded by lawyers, judges, and legal professionals, yet he had no one to defend him when he needed it most. As the afternoon session began, the courtroom felt different. Word had spread quickly through the legal community that Wellington had withdrawn from the case. Judge Harrison looked down at Rashid with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I understand your counsel has withdrawn from your case. Do you have replacement representation?" Rashid stood slowly, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume that no longer fit. "Your Honor, I'm currently seeking new counsel. I would like to request a continuance to—" "Objection, Your Honor," District Attorney Chen interrupted, rising from her seat with predatory satisfaction. "The defendant has had months to prepare for this trial. His attorney's withdrawal doesn't constitute grounds for delay. Justice delayed is justice denied." Judge Harrison frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, while I sympathize with your position, Ms. Chen has a point. This trial has already been delayed twice due to scheduling conflicts. The court's calendar is extremely full, and the public interest demands a timely resolution. But Your Honor," Rashid began, his voice betraying the first hints of desperation, "I cannot adequately defend myself without proper legal representation. This is a complex case involving—" "You have the right to represent yourself," Judge Harrison said, though her tone suggested she didn't think it was a wise choice. "Or you can accept court-appointed counsel, though I must warn you that given the complexity of this case and the short notice, it may not be ideal." The court-appointed attorney who shuffled forward was clearly overwhelmed. Thomas Burke looked like he had been pulled away from a stack of public defender cases involving petty theft and minor drug offenses. He whispered frantically to Rashid, "I need at least a week to review these files. This is way beyond my usual cases." Chen smiled coldly from across the courtroom. She had orchestrated this perfectly. The pressure on Wellington had been her idea, a few strategic phone calls to the right people, reminders about upcoming contract renewals and political appointments. She knew that Rashid would be helpless without proper representation, and she intended to strike while he was vulnerable. "I'm ready to proceed, Your Honor," Chen announced confidently. "The people's case is straightforward and well documented." Outside the courthouse windows, storm clouds were gathering, casting the room in an increasingly gloomy light. Rashid felt like a man watching his own execution, powerless to stop the proceedings that would destroy everything he had worked for. His thoughts drifted to his family back in Dubai, to his employees who depended on him, to the charitable foundations he had established to help underprivileged children get education and opportunities. As Chen began calling her first witnesses, former city officials who had been granted immunity in exchange for their testimony, Rashid realized he was witnessing a carefully orchestrated character assassination. Each witness told a story that painted him as a manipulative criminal who had used his wealth to corrupt the system. The supposed evidence was presented with theatrical flair, photographs of meetings taken out of context, financial records that showed legitimate business transactions portrayed as bribes, and emails that had been edited to remove crucial context. Burke, the court-appointed attorney, could barely keep up. His cross-examinations were weak and unfocused, clearly the work of someone who hadn't had time to properly prepare. With each passing hour, Rashid watched his reputation, his business, and his freedom slip away like sand through his fingers. During another brief recess, as Rashid sat alone at the defendant's table, he closed his eyes and tried to center himself. He thought about his father, who had taught him that true strength came not from wealth or power, but from integrity and the courage to do what was right. His father had built their first business, with nothing but determination and honest work. And Rashid had always tried to honor that legacy. But now, surrounded by a system that seemed determined to destroy him, Rashid felt more alone than ever. The courthouse was full of people, lawyers, reporters, spectators, but he might as well have been in solitary confinement. No one was willing to stand up for him. No one was willing to speak the truth on his behalf. Little did he know that in the back of the courtroom, a small figure had been watching everything unfold with keen, intelligent eyes that had seen far too much injustice for someone so young. The third day of the trial began with an atmosphere thick with anticipation and dread. Rashid had spent the previous night in his Manhattan penthouse, staring out at the city skyline he had helped shape, wondering if this would be his last night as a free man. The prosecution's case was building momentum like an avalanche, each witness adding another layer to the narrative of corruption and greed that they were constructing around him. Thomas Burke, his overwhelmed court-appointed attorney, had dark circles under his eyes from trying to digest months of complex financial documents in just 2 days. As they sat together at the defendant's table, Burke whispered nervously, "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I have to be honest with you. The evidence they're presenting is circumstantial, but it's very convincing to a jury. These financial transactions, the timing of the permits, the witness testimonies, it all fits together too neatly." Rashid nodded grimly. He had come to the same conclusion. The frame-up was sophisticated, the work of people who understood both the legal system and the intricacies of high-level business dealings. Someone had spent considerable time and resources ensuring that every piece of evidence would point directly at him while protecting the real perpetrators. "There's something else," Burke continued, his voice even lower. "I've been getting calls too. Anonymous tips suggesting I might want to consider my career prospects if I defend you too vigorously. I'm not Wellington. I can't just walk away, but I want you to know what we're up against." The realization hit Rashid like a physical blow. The corruption he was accused of was actually being perpetrated by his accusers. The very people claiming to seek justice were the ones perverting it. The irony was bitter. He was being destroyed for crimes committed by those destroying him. As Judge Harrison called the court to order, District Attorney Chen stood with renewed confidence. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Detective Michael Rodriguez to the stand." Rodriguez was a veteran NYPD detective. With 25 years of experience in white-collar crime, his testimony was damaging and thorough. He had supposedly discovered a pattern of suspicious financial transfers from Al-Mansouri Holdings to various shell companies, which had then made payments to city officials, campaign funds and personal accounts. "Detective Rodriguez," Chen asked, "can you explain to the jury what you discovered during your investigation of the defendant's financial records?" Rodriguez consulted his notes, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had testified in hundreds of trials. "We found over $50 million in suspicious transactions over a 3-year period. The money was laundered through multiple offshore accounts, then funneled to city officials through various intermediaries. The pattern was sophisticated but clear. Mr. Al-Mansouri was systematically buying influence to secure favorable treatment for his development projects." Burke's cross-examination was painful to watch. He stumbled through basic questions about chain of custody and investigative procedures, clearly out of his depth. When he asked about the source of the investigation, Rodriguez's answer sent a chill through the courtroom. "The investigation began when we received an anonymous tip about corruption in the city planning department. The tipster provided detailed financial records and claimed to have first-hand knowledge of bribes being paid." "Do you know the identity of this tipster?" Burke asked. "No, sir. They requested anonymity and we respected that request. However, the information they provided proved to be extremely accurate." As Rodriguez left the stand, Rashid felt the noose tightening around his neck. The anonymous tipster was likely one of the real perpetrators, using Rashid as a scapegoat to cover their own crimes, but proving that would require resources and time that he simply didn't have. The afternoon brought more damaging testimony. Sarah Mitchell, a former city planning official, took the stand, looking nervous but determined. Her testimony was devastating in its detail and apparent authenticity. "Ms. Mitchell," Chen asked, "can you tell the jury about your interactions with the defendant?" Mitchell's voice was steady but quiet. "Mr. Al-Mansouri approached me in early 2023 about the Hudson River Development Project. He was very charming at first, talking about his vision for the city, the jobs the project would create. But when I expressed concerns about environmental impact and displacement of low-income residents, his tone changed. How did it change? He became more direct about what he wanted. He said he understood that public service didn't pay very well, and that he appreciated the challenges people in my position faced. Then he mentioned a consulting fee his company could offer for my expertise on the project. Did you accept this consulting fee? Yes, Mitchell said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm ashamed to say I did. My daughter needed surgery, and I was facing bankruptcy. He offered me $200,000 for what he called advisory services, but it was clear what he really wanted was my vote on the zoning committee. Burke's cross-examination revealed some inconsistencies in Mitchell's timeline and raised questions about her own financial motivations. But the damage was done. To the jury, she appeared to be a remorseful public servant who had been corrupted by a wealthy businessman's influence. As the day wore on, more witnesses testified to similar interactions with Rashid. The picture being painted was of a man who used his wealth as a weapon, systematically corrupting anyone who stood between him and his goals. Each testimony was carefully crafted, containing enough truth to be believable, but twisted to serve the prosecution's narrative. During the final recess of the day, Rashid sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria, picking at a sandwich he had no appetite for. The weight of the accusations, the betrayal by his own attorney, and the systematic destruction of his reputation had taken a toll that went beyond mere exhaustion. He was watching his life's work being dismantled piece by piece, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to stop it. A security guard approached his table. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, there's someone who wants to see you." Rashid looked up, expecting to see another reporter or perhaps a process server. Instead, standing behind the guard was a small girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes were bright with intelligence and something else, determination. "You're the man from the trial," she said in accented English that suggested she was still learning the language, "the one they're lying about." Rashid was so surprised he could barely respond. "I'm sorry, little one, but you shouldn't be here. This isn't a place for children." The girl stepped closer, ignoring the security guard's uncertain expression. "My name is Sophia," she said, with a gravity that seemed far too mature for her age. "I've been watching your trial. They're doing to you what they did to my family." "What do you mean?" Sophia's eyes filled with pain that no child should ever have to carry. "My papa was a prosecutor in my country. He tried to stop the corruption, tried to make the bad people pay for what they did. But the bad people were too strong, and they made everyone turn against him instead. They said he was the criminal, just like they're saying about you." The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I really need to escort this child out of the building." But Rashid held up his hand. Something about this little girl's words resonated with him in a way that nothing had for days. "Wait," he said. "Let her finish." Sophia looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that was startling. "I know about the law," she said. "My papa taught me before they killed him. I know about evidence and witnesses and how truth is supposed to work. What they're doing to you isn't justice. It's the same corruption my papa died fighting against." Before Rashid could respond, the security guard gently but firmly began to escort Sophia away. As she was led out of the cafeteria, she called back over her shoulder, "I won't let them do this to you too, I promise." Rashid sat in stunned silence, wondering who this remarkable little girl was and how someone so young could understand the complexities of what was happening to him. He had no way of knowing that Sophia had spent the last several months living on the streets after her father's death, surviving by her wits and an extraordinary intelligence that had absorbed everything her prosecutor father had taught her about the law and justice. As he returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session, Rashid couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Sophia had been more than just a chance meeting. Something in her eyes, in her words, in her fierce determination, had rekindled a spark of hope that he thought had been extinguished forever. The fourth day of the trial brought an unexpected development that sent shockwaves through the legal community. As Rashid entered the courthouse that morning, he was surprised to find Sophia waiting for him on the steps, this time accompanied by a woman he didn't recognize, a legal aid attorney named Jennifer Walsh who worked with homeless children. "Mr. Al-Mansouri," Walsh said, approaching him cautiously. "I know this is highly irregular, but Sophia came to our office yesterday with some remarkable claims about your case. I think you need to hear what she has to say." Sophia stepped forward, carrying a worn backpack that seemed too large for her small frame. Despite her ragged appearance, there was something commanding about her presence. "I've been researching your case," she said, with the seriousness of someone 3 times her age. "I know who's really behind the corruption, and I know how to prove you're innocent." Rashid knelt down to her level, studying the intense intelligence in her young eyes. "Sophia, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is very complicated. The people involved are powerful and dangerous." "I know about powerful and dangerous people," Sophia replied, her voice carrying a weight that spoke to experiences no child should have. "They killed my family because my father wouldn't stop fighting corruption in our country. When we came to America, I thought we would be safe, that justice worked here, but I was wrong. The same kind of bad people exist everywhere." Walsh interjected, "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I've spent the last 24 hours with Sophia, and I can tell you she possesses an extraordinary understanding of legal procedures and financial crimes. Her father was not just any prosecutor. He was a specialist in international corruption cases who worked with Interpol and the FBI before his death." Sophia opened her backpack and pulled out a collection of newspapers, legal documents, and notes written in multiple languages. "I've been living near the courthouse for months," she explained. "I watch trials because they remind me of my papa's work. When I saw your case beginning, something felt wrong. The evidence was too perfect, too convenient." She spread out several newspaper clippings on the courthouse steps. "Look at these stories from the past year. There's a pattern. City officials who opposed certain development projects either resigned suddenly, were arrested on corruption charges, or died in accidents. But the projects all had one thing in common. They benefited the same group of investors." Rashid examined the clippings, his business mind beginning to see the connections Sophia was highlighting. "The Meridian Investment Group," he said, recognizing several names. "They bid against me on several projects, including the Hudson River development." "Exactly," Sophia said, her eyes lighting up. "And look at this." She pulled out a photocopy of a financial document. "This is a bank transfer from one of the accounts they say belongs to you. But see this routing number." "It's not from the bank they claim it is. I looked it up in the library computer. This account belongs to Meridian, not you." Walsh looked impressed despite herself. "She's right, Mr. Al-Mansouri. I had a forensic accountant friend look at some of these documents last night. There are several discrepancies in the financial evidence that suggest sophisticated forgery." As they were talking, Thomas Burke arrived, looking even more frazzled than the previous day. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, we need to get inside. Judge Harrison wants to see us in chambers before court begins." Rashid stood, but Sophia grabbed his sleeve. "Don't give up," she said urgently. "I've seen what happens when good people give up fighting corruption. The bad people win and innocent people suffer. My papa died believing that truth would eventually win, but only if someone is brave enough to keep fighting for it." In Judge Harrison's chambers, the atmosphere was tense. The judge looked tired and frustrated as she addressed both the defense and prosecution. "I've been a judge for 22 years, she began, "and I've never been more uncomfortable with a case. Mr. Burke, your client's right to adequate counsel is being compromised. And Ms. Chen, while your case appears strong, there are procedural concerns that trouble me." District Attorney Chen maintained her confident demeanor. "Your Honor, the defendant has had ample opportunity to secure proper representation. His former attorney's withdrawal was his choice, not ours. Justice cannot be held hostage by the defendant's legal strategy." "That's a harsh characterization, Ms. Chen," Judge Harrison replied. "Mr. Wellington's withdrawal came at a critical juncture and has clearly prejudiced the defense." Burke spoke up nervously. "Your Honor, we have some new information that may be relevant to the case. There appear to be discrepancies in some of the financial evidence that warrant further investigation." "What kind of discrepancies?" Chen asked sharply, alarm bells clearly ringing in her head. "Potential document forgery, Your Honor. Inconsistencies in routing numbers and account information that suggest the evidence may have been fabricated." Chen's face reddened. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt by the defense to create reasonable doubt through unfounded allegations. These documents were verified by federal investigators and have been in the prosecution's possession for months." Judge Harrison frowned. "Mr. Burke, do you have concrete evidence of forgery, or is this speculation?" Burke hesitated, Knowing that Sophia's amateur investigation wouldn't hold up in court without proper expert testimony, we would need time to have the documents examined by qualified experts, Your Honor. Time we don't have, Chen interjected. This trial has already been delayed extensively. The defendant cannot be allowed to manipulate the system indefinitely. As they returned to the courtroom, Rashid felt the familiar weight of despair settling over him again. Even with Sophia's remarkable insights, the legal system seemed determined to railroad him toward conviction. The evidence against him, however fabricated, was being accepted at face value, while any attempt to challenge it was dismissed as desperate defense tactics. The morning session brought more prosecution witnesses, each one adding another nail to the coffin of Rashid's reputation. Dr. Elizabeth Warner, a supposed expert in municipal corruption, testified about the clear patterns of bribery and influence peddling evident in the financial records. Her testimony was polished and professional, designed to give academic credibility to the prosecution's narrative. During the lunch recess, Rashid found Sophia waiting for him again, this time with a new collection of documents. "I've been to the library every morning for months," she explained. "I learned how to use the computers, how to search public records. Look what I found." She showed him a series of property transfer records and corporate filings. "There's 3 of the witnesses who testified against you. They all bought new houses within weeks of agreeing to cooperate with the prosecution. Expensive houses, paid for in cash. And look at this. Dr. Warner, the expert who just testified, her research institute received $1 million grant from a foundation that's connected to Meridian Investment Group. The implications were staggering. Sophia, a 5-year-old homeless girl with no formal legal training, had uncovered evidence of witness tampering and prosecutorial corruption that professional investigators had either missed or chosen to ignore. "How did you learn to do this?" Rashid asked, genuinely amazed. "My papa taught me that the truth always leaves traces," Sophia replied. "You just have to know where to look and be brave enough to keep looking, even when powerful people want you to stop." He said that corruption is like a disease. It spreads from person to person, and the only cure is exposing it to the light. That afternoon, as the prosecution rested its case, Rashid made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up and addressed the court directly. "Your Honor, I would like to represent myself for the remainder of this trial." Burke looked shocked. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I strongly advise against—" "Thank you, Mr. Burke, but I've made my decision. I'm going to defend myself." Judge Harrison looked concerned. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, representing yourself in a complex criminal case is extremely risky. Are you certain you want to proceed without professional counsel?" "I am, Your Honor. I've spent my entire career solving complex problems and navigating challenging situations. I understand the risks, but I also understand that sometimes you have to take responsibility for your own fate." What Rashid didn't say, but what everyone in the courtroom could sense, was that his decision had been influenced by his conversations with a remarkable little girl who had taught him that courage comes not from having power or resources, but from having the determination to fight for what's right, regardless of the odds. As court adjourned for the day, Sophia approached him once more. "Tomorrow, you start fighting back," she said with fierce determination. "And you won't be fighting alone. I'll be there and I'll help you show them the truth." Looking into her eyes, Rashid realized that this extraordinary child had given him something he thought he had lost forever: hope and the courage to fight back against the forces trying to destroy him. The 5th day of the trial marked the beginning of Rashid's defense, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. News of his decision to represent himself had spread throughout the legal community, with many viewing it as either an act of supreme confidence or complete desperation. As Rashid rose to deliver his opening statement, he carried with him not only the weight of his own future, but also the research and encouragement of a remarkable little girl who had shown him that truth could be found in the most unexpected places. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Rashid began, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "Over the past 4 days, you have heard a carefully constructed story about corruption and greed. You have been presented with documents, witness testimony, and expert analysis that paints me as a villain who used his wealth to corrupt our system of justice. Today, I stand before you not just to proclaim my innocence, but to expose the real corruption that has been perpetrated against me and against all of you." Rashid moved closer to the jury box, making eye contact with each member. Mus, the prosecution would have you believe that I systematically bribed city officials to secure favorable treatment for my development projects. But what if I told you that the very people making these accusations are the ones who actually committed these crimes? What if the evidence against me has been fabricated by the real perpetrators to cover their own tracks? District Attorney Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This was not the desperate, rambling defense she had expected from a man representing himself. I want to show you something, Rashid continued, approaching the evidence table. This is Prosecution Exhibit 23, a bank transfer allegedly from my company to a shell account used to bribe city officials. The prosecution has told you this proves my guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. He held up the document so the jury could see it. But look carefully at this routing number, 021089. According to the prosecution, this is the routing number for First National Bank of Manhattan, where my company has its primary account. Rashid pulled out a laptop and connected it to the courtroom's projection system. With the court's permission, I would like to demonstrate something for the jury. Judge Harrison nodded, clearly intrigued despite her reservations about his self-representation. The screen displayed the Federal Reserve's official database of bank routing numbers. As you can see, routing number 021089 does not belong to First National Bank of Manhattan. It belongs to Meridian Financial Services, a subsidiary of Meridian Investment Group, the very company that competed against me for the Hudson River Development Project and stood to gain the most from my downfall. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Chen shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is testifying rather than making an opening statement. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled, though she looked intrigued. Mr. Al-Mansouri, please confine yourself to what you intend to prove. Of course, Your Honor. I intend to prove that this entire case is built on fabricated evidence, perjured testimony, and a conspiracy to frame me for crimes committed by others. I will show that the real corruption in this case comes not from me, but from those who have manipulated the system to destroy an innocent man. As Rashid returned to his seat, he noticed Sophia sitting in the back of the courtroom. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, her young face radiating a determination that seemed to infuse him with strength. For his first witness, Rashid called Dr. Marcus Thompson, a forensic accountant he had hired using his personal funds. Thompson's credentials were impeccable. Former FBI financial crimes investigator, PhD in forensic accounting, expert witness in over 200 federal cases. Dr. Thompson, Rashid began, have you had an opportunity to examine the financial documents presented by the prosecution as evidence of my alleged crimes? Yes, I have conducted a thorough analysis of all financial evidence in this case. What did you discover? Thompson consulted his notes. I found significant irregularities that suggest document manipulation or forgery. Of the 47 financial documents presented by the prosecution, 31 contain discrepancies in routing numbers, account numbers, or digital timestamps that indicate they are not authentic. The impact of this testimony was immediate and dramatic. Several jury members leaned forward, and even Judge Harrison looked surprised. Chen's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. Can you give the jury a specific example? Rashid asked. Certainly. Prosecution Exhibit 23, which allegedly shows a $2 million transfer from Al-Mansouri Holdings to a shell company, contains a routing number that belongs to Meridian Financial Services, not the bank claimed by the prosecution. Additionally, the digital timestamp shows the document was created on a date when Mr. Al-Mansouri was attending a UN conference in Geneva, documented by hundreds of witnesses and media coverage. During cross-examination, Chen attacked Thompson's methodology and credentials, but he held firm under pressure. His testimony was technical but devastating, systematically dismantling the financial foundation of the prosecution's case. Rashid's second witness was Detective Patricia Williams, a retired NYPD investigator who had been willing to examine the case independently. Her testimony revealed serious flaws in the original investigation. Detective Williams, what did you find when you reviewed the investigation procedures used in this case? Several red flags. Mr. Al-Mansouri, the anonymous tipster who provided the initial allegations, has never been identified or verified. The search warrants were obtained using affidavits that contained unverified claims. Most troubling, The chain of custody for several key pieces of evidence shows gaps that could have allowed for tampering. In your professional opinion, does this investigation meet the standards you would expect for a case of this magnitude? No, it does not. There are too many procedural shortcuts and unexplained anomalies. This appears to be an investigation designed to confirm a predetermined conclusion rather than discover the truth. The afternoon brought Rashid's most dramatic moment. He called Sarah Mitchell, the former city official who had testified against him, back to the stand as a hostile witness. Miss Mitchell, you testified that I offered you a consulting fee in exchange for your vote on my development project. That's correct. You said this conversation took place on March 15th, 2023, in your office at City Hall. Yes. Rashid approached the witness stand with a document in his hand. I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A. Can you tell the jury what this is? Mitchell examined the document nervously. That appears to be a travel itinerary. Whose travel itinerary? Yours. And what does it show for March 15th, 2023? Mitchell's voice became barely audible. That you were in Dubai. That's correct. I was attending my father's funeral in Dubai on March 15th, 2023. I have airline records, passport stamps, and testimony from over 300 people who attended the funeral, including the Crown Prince of Dubai. So I ask you again, Miss Mitchell, how could I have offered you a bribe in your office in New York when I was burying my father 6,000 miles away? The courtroom erupted. Mitchell broke down on the stand, admitting that she had been coached by prosecution investigators about what to say and when to say it. Through her tears, she revealed that she had been threatened with prosecution herself unless she testified against Rashid. They said if I didn't cooperate, they would charge me with corruption, and I would lose everything, she sobbed. They promised me immunity and help with my daughter's medical bills if I just said what they wanted me to say. Judge Harrison called an immediate recess, clearly shaken by this revelation. During the break, Sophia approached Rashid in the hallway. You're doing it, she said, her eyes shining with excitement. You're showing them the truth, just like my papa used to do. We're doing it, Rashid corrected her. None of this would have been possible without your research and insights. You've given me the tools I needed to fight back. Sophia smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since they met. My papa always said that truth is like water. It always finds a way through the cracks, no matter how hard people try to dam it up. As they prepared to return to the courtroom, Rashid realized that this extraordinary little girl had not only helped him uncover the conspiracy against him, but had also taught him something profound about courage, justice, and the power of never giving up in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The prosecution's case was crumbling, but Rashid knew that the most dangerous moment in any fight comes when a cornered enemy becomes desperate. The real conspiracy behind his persecution was beginning to emerge, and those responsible would not go down without a vicious counterattack. The sixth day of the trial began with an unexpected development that sent shockwaves through the courthouse. As Rashid arrived that morning, he found the building surrounded by federal agents and news crews. Word had leaked about the dramatic testimony from the previous day, and the implications were sending ripples throughout the city's political establishment. Judge Harrison called an emergency hearing in her chambers before the trial resumed. Present were Rashid, District Attorney Chen, FBI Special Agent Karen Hayes, and surprisingly, the State Attorney General himself, Robert Morrison. Gentlemen, ladies, Judge Harrison began, her usual composure strained, we have a situation that has escalated beyond a simple criminal trial. Agent Hayes, would you please explain what brings the FBI into this courtroom? Agent Hayes, a stern woman in her 40s with steel-grey eyes, opened a thick folder. Your Honor, based on testimony given yesterday, we have opened a federal investigation into possible prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. We have reason to believe that this case is connected to a broader pattern of corruption involving multiple city officials and private entities. Chen's face had drained of color. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The FBI has no jurisdiction over a state prosecution. They do when federal crimes are involved. Attorney General Morrison interjected. Ms. Chen, I'm placing you on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. This prosecution will be taken over by a special prosecutor. The bombshell announcement meant that Chen, the architect of the case against Rashid, was now herself under investigation. As they returned to the courtroom, Rashid felt a mixture of vindication and concern. The truth was emerging, but he knew that desperate people could be incredibly dangerous. Judge Harrison addressed the packed courtroom. Due to extraordinary circumstances, this trial will continue under the supervision of Special Prosecutor James Martinez, who has been appointed by the Attorney General's office. Martinez was a veteran federal prosecutor with a reputation for integrity and thoroughness. His first act was to request a thorough review of all evidence in the case. Your Honor, given the serious allegations that have emerged, I believe it would be appropriate to allow the defense to present additional evidence while we conduct our review. Rashid seized this opportunity to call his next witness, Jennifer Walsh, the legal aid attorney who had been working with Sophia. Walsh's testimony introduced a new dimension to the case that no one had anticipated. Ms. Walsh, Rashid began, can you tell the court about your work with homeless children in this city? I represent children who have been displaced by various circumstances, including those seeking asylum from political persecution. Many of these children have witnessed serious crimes in their home countries and have valuable information about international corruption networks. Have you encountered any cases involving children who possess knowledge relevant to this trial? Yes, I represent Sofia Petrov, a 5-year-old girl whose father was assassinated in Eastern Europe for investigating international money laundering operations. Before his death, he uncovered evidence of a corruption network that spans multiple countries and involves several prominent American investment firms. The revelation that Sophia was not just a random homeless child, but the daughter of a murdered anti-corruption prosecutor sent murmurs throughout the courtroom. Rashid could see Sophia in the back, sitting with incredible composure for someone whose tragic story was being revealed to the world. Miss Walsh, does Sophia's father's investigation have any connection to the charges against Mr. Al-Mansouri? Yes. Among the documents her father compiled before his death were records showing that Meridian Investment Group was the American subsidiary of a company involved in large-scale money laundering. The techniques used to frame Mr. Al-Mansouri, fabricated financial documents, manufactured evidence, corrupted witnesses, matched the pattern her father documented in cases across Europe. Special Prosecutor Martinez looked intrigued. Miss Walsh, are these documents available for examination? Some of them, yes. Sophia managed to escape with copies of her father's most important files when their home was attacked. She's been carrying them with her ever since, hoping to find someone who could help continue her father's work. The afternoon session brought even more dramatic revelations. Rashid called Detective Michael Rodriguez back to the stand as a hostile witness. Rodriguez, who had initially testified about the damning financial evidence against Rashid, now found himself under intense scrutiny. Detective Rodriguez, Rashid began, you testified that your investigation began with an anonymous tip about corruption. Is that correct? Yes. Did you make any effort to verify the credibility of this anonymous source? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. We followed standard procedures for handling anonymous tips. What standard procedures? Can you tell the jury exactly what steps you took to verify the information provided? We checked the information against available records and found it to be accurate. Rashid approached with a manila folder. Detective, I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit F. Do you recognize this document? Rodriguez examined it nervously. It appears to be a bank record. It's a record showing a $50,000 deposit into your personal account, made 3 days after you opened the investigation against me. Can you explain this deposit? The courtroom fell silent. Rodriguez's face went red, then pale. That was a legitimate loan from a family member. From which family member? My brother. Your brother who works as a janitor and makes $30,000 a year. The same brother who, according to his tax returns, has never had more than $5,000 in savings. Rodriguez began to stammer, clearly caught in a lie. Under continued questioning, he admitted that he had received money from sources he couldn't remember, for purposes he claimed were legitimate, but couldn't explain. The most explosive moment came when Rashid introduced phone records showing that Rodriguez had been in contact with representatives of Meridian Investment Group throughout his investigation. The detective finally broke down under pressure, admitting that he had been directed to focus his investigation on specific targets while ignoring evidence that pointed in other directions. They told me this was about national security, Rodriguez said, his career clearly over. They said Al-Mansouri was connected to terrorist financing and that normal procedures didn't apply. I thought I was serving my country. As Rodriguez's testimony concluded, Sophia approached Rashid during a brief recess. "My papa always said that corruption works by making good people think they're doing bad things for good reasons," she said with wisdom far beyond her years. "That man wasn't evil. He was just scared and confused." "How do you stay so wise and forgiving after everything you've been through?" Rashid asked. "Because my papa taught me that hate makes you stupid, and stupid people can't fight corruption. You have to stay smart and keep your heart clean if you want to beat bad people." The day concluded with Special Prosecutor Martinez making an unprecedented announcement. "Your Honor, based on the evidence presented today, the prosecution requests permission to withdraw all charges against Mr. Al-Mansouri, pending a complete investigation into the conduct of this case." Judge Harrison looked both relieved and troubled. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, the court owes you an apology. It appears you have been the victim of a serious miscarriage of justice." But as they left the courthouse that evening, Rashid knew that while the immediate threat to his freedom was over, the real fight was just beginning. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy him was much larger and more dangerous than anyone had realized. And somewhere out there, powerful people were already planning their next move. Sophia walked beside him, carrying her worn backpack full of her father's research. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "The bad people are just getting started, but now we know who they are, and we have each other." Looking down at this remarkable little girl who had saved his life and shown him the true meaning of courage, Rashid realized that their partnership was about to become something much larger than either of them had imagined. Together, they would continue the work her father had died for, fighting corruption wherever they found it, and ensuring that justice would ultimately prevail. 3 months after the charges against Rashid were dropped, the ripple effects of the corrupted prosecution were still spreading throughout the city's power structure. The federal investigation had expanded into a massive operation involving multiple agencies, and what had started as a simple criminal trial had evolved into one of the largest corruption scandals in New York's history. But for Rashid and Sophia, the real work was just beginning. Rashid had established a new foundation called the Truth and Justice Initiative, housed in a renovated building in Lower Manhattan that served both as his new headquarters and as a safe house for whistleblowers and their families. The top floor had been converted into a comfortable apartment for Sophia, who had officially become his ward through the legal system. Jennifer Walsh had helped navigate the complex adoption procedures, and while the paperwork was still processing, Sophia had found the first real home she'd known since her father's death. The transformation in both their lives had been remarkable. Sophia, no longer living on the streets, had blossomed into an even more extraordinary young person. With proper nutrition, healthcare, and education, her already formidable intellect had reached new heights. She attended a prestigious private school during the day, but spent her afternoons working alongside Rashid, analyzing financial documents and legal cases with the skill of someone 3 times her age. "The Meridian network is bigger than we thought," Sophia said one afternoon, spreading out documents across the conference table in their office. She had developed a system of color-coded files and charts that mapped out the connections between various corporations, politicians, and criminal organizations. "Look at this pattern. They're not just stealing money, they're stealing entire government systems." Rashid studied her analysis, continuously amazed by her ability to see connections that escaped even professional investigators. "Explain it to me." "They identify honest officials who can't be bought," Sophia continued, her young voice carrying the authority of someone who had inherited her father's investigative genius. "Then they frame them for corruption, using the same techniques they used against you. Once the honest people are gone, they replace them with people they control. It's like a virus that spreads through the government." The evidence Sophia had compiled was staggering. Using her father's research as a starting point, they had uncovered a network that spanned dozens of countries and involved billions of dollars in stolen public funds. The American operation, centered around Meridian Investment Group, was just one tentacle of a massive international criminal enterprise. Their work had not gone unnoticed by those they were investigating. Over the past month, they had faced increasing pressure and threats. Rashid's business interests had been targeted by regulatory investigations that seemed designed to harass rather than uncover wrongdoing. Anonymous callers had made veiled threats against Sophia's safety. Their office had been broken into twice, though nothing had been taken, clearly warning shots meant to intimidate them into backing down. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, his assistant Sarah announced over the intercom. Agent Hayes from the FBI is here to see you. Agent Hayes entered the office with a grim expression that immediately put Rashid on alert. We need to talk, she said, glancing meaningfully at Sophia. Privately. Anything you say to me can be said in front of Sophia, Rashid replied firmly. We're partners in this investigation. Hayes hesitated, then nodded. All right, we've received credible intelligence that there's going to be an attempt on both your lives within the next 48 hours. The people you're investigating have decided you're too dangerous to be allowed to continue. Sophia looked up from her documents with the calm composure that never ceased to amaze the adults around her. Who's going to try to kill us? Hayes was clearly uncomfortable discussing assassination attempts with a 5-year-old, but she had learned to respect Sophia's unusual maturity. We're not sure of the specific individuals, but the order came from high up in the Meridian network. They've hired professionals. Then we need to accelerate our timeline, Sophia said matter-of-factly. How long before we can present our evidence to the grand jury? Special Prosecutor Martinez, who had been working closely with them since taking over the case, had been preparing a comprehensive presentation to a federal grand jury. The evidence they had compiled was sufficient to bring down dozens of officials and expose an international criminal conspiracy. But the legal process moved slowly. Martinez says at least 2 more weeks, Hayes replied. But frankly, I don't think you'll survive that long if you stay visible. I'm recommending that you both go into protective custody immediately. Rashid was about to respond when Sophia suddenly stood up, her eyes fixed on something outside the window. It's too late, she said quietly. They're already here. Looking out the window, Rashid saw what had caught Sophia's attention. Several black SUVs had pulled up around the building, and men in dark suits were taking positions at all the exits. These weren't FBI agents. Their positioning and equipment were all wrong. Back door, Hayes said urgently, drawing her weapon. There's a federal safe house 20 minutes from here. But as they moved toward the rear of the office, they could hear footsteps in the stairwells. The building was surrounded and their escape routes were being systematically cut off. The roof, Sophia said suddenly. There's a fire escape that connects to the building next door. I scouted it when we first moved in here. How did you? Rashid began. Papa taught me to always have an escape plan, she replied, already moving toward a maintenance ladder that led to a roof access hatch. He said that when you fight corruption, you're fighting people who don't follow rules, so you have to think like them to survive. As they climbed toward the roof, they could hear voices and footsteps below them. The men who had come for them were professionals, moving through the building with military precision. Hayes had called for backup, but Rashid knew it would take time for help to arrive. The roof was windswept and cold, with a clear view of the Manhattan skyline. The fire escape Sophia had mentioned was indeed there, but it was a terrifying 20-foot gap between buildings, with nothing but concrete 8 stories below. I can't make that jump, Hayes said, looking at the gap with professional assessment. But you two might be able to. We're not leaving you, Rashid said firmly. You have to, Hayes replied. The evidence you've compiled is too important. If they kill you, everything your father died for will be lost, she said to Sophia. And everything we've worked for will be meaningless. Sophia looked at the FBI agent with eyes that held too much understanding of sacrifice and loss. Agent Hayes, my papa used to say that the most important thing about fighting corruption isn't winning every battle. It's making sure the fight continues even when the fighters fall. Before either adult could stop her, Sophia had climbed onto the fire escape. Despite her small size, she moved with surprising agility and confidence. Come on, she called back. We have work to finish. Rashid followed, his heart pounding as he navigated the precarious crossing between buildings. Behind them, they could hear the roof access door being forced open. Hayes had stayed behind to buy them time, and the sound of gunfire soon echoed across the rooftops. As they reached the adjacent building and began their descent, Sophia grabbed Rashid's arm. Agent Hayes is going to be okay, she said with conviction that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her years. Good people don't die when they're fighting for something important. Papa taught me that. Rashid hoped she was right, but he knew they were now truly on their own against forces that had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. The little girl beside him, who had already lost so much to corruption and violence, was now his only ally in a fight that seemed to grow more dangerous with each passing hour. As they emerged onto the street and began to make their way toward the federal safe house, Rashid realized that their investigation had crossed a line from which there was no return. They had moved beyond simply exposing corruption. They were now in a life-or-death struggle with people who had unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. But looking at Sophia's determined face, he also realized that they had something their enemies didn't: the unshakable conviction that comes from fighting for justice rather than profit, and the bond that forms between people who have chosen to stand together against overwhelming odds. "Where do we go now?" he asked her as they walked through the crowded New York streets, trying to blend in with the normal people going about their normal lives. Sophia's response was immediate and decisive. "We go to court. Tomorrow is the grand jury presentation, whether they're ready for us or not. Papa always said that when evil people try to silence you, the most important thing you can do is speak louder." The federal courthouse had been transformed into a fortress overnight. After the attack on their office and the shooting incident involving Agent Hayes, who had miraculously survived with only minor injuries, the authorities had taken unprecedented security measures for the grand jury presentation. Metal detectors, armed marshals, and bomb-sniffing dogs created an atmosphere more reminiscent of a military operation than a legal proceeding. Rashid and Sophia had spent the night in a safe house, but neither had slept much. They had used the time to organize their evidence one final time, creating a presentation that would expose the full scope of the Meridian conspiracy. Sophia had insisted on participating directly in the presentation, despite concerns about putting a child in such a dangerous situation. "Five grand juries are supposed to represent the people," she had argued with Special Prosecutor Martinez. "I am people too, and I have the right to tell them what these bad men did to my family and to Mr. Al-Mansouri." Martinez had initially been reluctant, but Sophia's compelling argument and her extraordinary knowledge of the evidence had convinced him. "All right," he had finally agreed, "but we do this carefully and with maximum security." As they entered the courthouse that morning, Rashid noticed the crowd that had gathered outside. Word of the case had spread throughout the city, and people were beginning to understand that this was about more than just one man's persecution. This was about whether the system of justice itself could survive the corruption that was eating away at it from within. The grand jury room was smaller than Rashid had expected, with 23 citizens seated in a semicircle around a simple table. These were ordinary people: teachers, shopkeepers, retirees, students who had been called to perform one of democracy's most important functions. Looking at their faces, Rashid saw curiosity, concern, and determination. Martinez began with an overview of the case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the grand jury, what began as a prosecution for corruption has evolved into the exposure of corruption. We are here today not to seek an indictment against Mr. Al-Mansouri, but to present evidence of a criminal conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of our city and state government." For the next 2 hours, Martinez methodically presented the evidence they had compiled: financial documents showing the flow of money through shell companies, phone records revealing coordination between supposed enemies, testimony from witnesses who had been bribed, threatened, or manipulated into giving false testimony. When it was Sophia's turn to speak, she approached the witness chair with a composure that silenced the room. Despite her small size, there was something commanding about her presence that demanded attention and respect. "My name is Sophia Petrov," she began, her accented English clear and precise. "I am 5 years old, and I am here to tell you about corruption." Several grand jurors exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about hearing testimony from such a young child. But as Sophia began to speak about her father's work and the network of criminals who had destroyed her family, the room fell completely silent. "My papa was a prosecutor like Mr. Martinez," she continued. "He fought against bad people who steal money from countries and make good people suffer. These bad people killed him because he wouldn't stop fighting them. When we came to America, I thought we would be safe, but the same bad people are here too." She pulled out a folder of documents, many of them copies of her father's original research. "These papers show how the bad people work. They don't just steal money, they steal the people who are supposed to stop them. They make police and judges and prosecutors work for them instead of for good people." One of the grand jurors, an elderly woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Sophia, how do you understand all these complicated things?" "Papa taught me," Sophia replied simply. "He said that fighting corruption is the most important work anyone can do, because corruption makes everything else impossible. If the people who are supposed to protect us are working for the bad guys, then nobody is safe. For the next hour, Sophia walked the grand jury through the evidence with a clarity and intelligence that left everyone in the room amazed. She explained complex financial transactions in simple terms, drew connections between seemingly unrelated events, and answered technical questions with the precision of a seasoned investigator. The people who tried to hurt Mr. Al-Mansouri are the same people who hurt my family, she concluded. They used the same tricks, the same lies, the same threats. But they made one mistake. They thought that because I am small and alone, I couldn't fight back. They were wrong. When Sophia finished her testimony, the room was completely silent. Several grand jurors were visibly moved, and even the court reporter seemed to be fighting back tears. Rashid then took his turn, explaining how the conspiracy had targeted him, and describing the sophisticated methods used to frame innocent people while protecting the guilty. "This is not just about me," he told the grand jury. "This is about a systematic assault on the foundations of justice itself. If we allow this to continue, if we let these criminals corrupt our institutions with impunity, then we are surrendering our democracy to organized crime." The most dramatic moment came when Martinez presented recordings that Sophia had helped them obtain. Using techniques her father had taught her, she had managed to record conversations between Meridian operatives, discussing their plans to eliminate both her and Rashid. "The girl is the real threat," one voice said on the recording. "She has all her father's files, and she's smart enough to use them. We should have dealt with her when we took out the prosecutor. And Al-Mansouri? He's just the front man. But his money and reputation give the girl credibility. Together, they're dangerous." The recording continued with discussions of assassination plans, witness intimidation, and the systematic corruption of law enforcement officials. The evidence was so damning that several grand jurors looked physically ill. After 6 hours of testimony, Martinez made his closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence you have heard today reveals a criminal conspiracy of unprecedented scope and sophistication. These criminals have not only committed fraud and theft on a massive scale, but they have corrupted the very institutions we depend on to protect us from such crimes." When the grand jury retired to deliberate, Rashid and Sophia waited in a secure conference room. Despite the gravity of the situation, Sophia seemed remarkably calm. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Rashid asked. "They already believe us," Sophia replied with confidence. "I could see it in their faces. Papa taught me to watch people's faces when you tell them the truth. They always recognize it, even when they don't want to." 2 hours later, the grand jury returned with their decision. The foreman, a middle-aged teacher named Robert Chen, stood to announce their findings. "We, the grand jury of the Southern District of New York, find that there is probable cause to believe that the individuals named in the prosecutor's presentation have committed federal crimes, including conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder." The room erupted with activity as Martinez and the FBI agents present began coordinating the massive arrest operation that would follow. Indictments were being prepared for over 40 individuals, including city officials, police officers, prosecutors, judges, and business executives. But for Rashid and Sophia, the most important victory was not the legal one. As they left the courthouse that evening, surrounded by federal marshals for their protection, they knew they had honored the memory of Sophia's father and proved that truth could still triumph over corruption. "Papa would be proud," Sophia said quietly, as they walked toward the waiting car that would take them to a new safe location. "He should be," Rashid replied. "His daughter just helped save the system of justice he died defending." Looking back at the courthouse, with its promise of equality under law carved in stone above the entrance, both of them knew that their work was far from over. The corruption they had exposed was like a cancer that would require ongoing treatment, but they had proven that even the most powerful criminals could be brought to justice when ordinary people had the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. 6 months after the grand jury indictments, the moment of ultimate reckoning had arrived. The federal courthouse was packed beyond capacity for what the media had dubbed the trial of the century. 43 defendants, including former Mayor Patricia Wilson, 3 judges, 12 city officials, and the entire executive board of Meridian Investment Group, sat in the expanded courtroom facing charges that could send them to prison for life. Rashid sat in the front row of the gallery, watching as the system of justice that had nearly destroyed him now worked to bring down those who had corrupted it. Beside him, Sophia clutched a photograph of her father, her young face a mask of determination and hope. The trial had lasted 3 months, with Sophia serving as the prosecution's star witness, despite her young age. Her testimony had been devastating in its clarity and detail, walking the jury through her father's research and explaining how the international corruption network operated. She had faced aggressive cross-examination from some of the best defense attorneys money could buy, but her composure and intelligence had never wavered. "The defense calls character witnesses for the defendant Patricia Wilson," announced the lead defense attorney, a high-powered lawyer from Washington, D.C., who had been brought in to represent the former mayor. For 2 days, the defense paraded prominent citizens who spoke about Wilson's contributions to the city and her supposed integrity. But everyone in the courtroom knew this was a desperate last stand. The evidence against the defendants was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial documents, witness testimony, and the intricate web of corruption that Sophia and Rashid had spent months unraveling. On the final day of testimony, Special Prosecutor Martinez called Rashid to the stand one last time. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, looking back on everything that has happened, what do you want this jury to understand about this case?" Rashid looked directly at the jury members, ordinary citizens who held the future of justice in their hands. "I want them to understand that this was never really about me. I was just one target in a systematic assault on the rule of law itself. These defendants didn't just steal money. They stole the faith that ordinary people have in their government." He gestured toward Sophia in the gallery. "That little girl's father died fighting this same corruption in another country. She came to America believing that justice would work here, that the system would protect the innocent and punish the guilty. When I met her, I was about to lose that same faith. Together, we learned that democracy only survives when ordinary people have the courage to defend it." The defense's closing arguments were eloquent but hollow, trying to portray the defendants as victims of an overzealous prosecution. But when Martinez stood for his final argument, the courtroom fell completely silent. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "6 months ago, an innocent man almost went to prison for crimes committed by the people sitting at that defense table. A 5-year-old girl was living on the streets because criminals had murdered her father and destroyed her family. The system of justice that we all depend on was being systematically corrupted by people who put profit above principle." Martinez walked over to stand near Sophia, but something remarkable happened. That innocent man and that homeless child refused to give up. They fought back against overwhelming odds, and they exposed a conspiracy that reaches into every level of our government. They proved that truth is stronger than lies, that courage is stronger than corruption, and that justice can prevail when ordinary people refuse to surrender to evil. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with the verdict forms in his hand, and the courtroom held its collective breath. On the charge of conspiracy to commit racketeering, we find the defendant Patricia Wilson guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. One by one, guilty verdicts were read for each defendant on each charge. By the time the foreman finished, 43 of the most powerful people in the city had been convicted of federal crimes. As the defendants were led away in handcuffs, Sophia stood up in the gallery and spoke in a clear voice that carried throughout the courtroom. "This is for you, Papa, Justice won." 2 years later, Rashid stood on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, looking out over a Manhattan skyline that had been transformed by his renewed business ventures and philanthropic efforts. The Truth and Justice Initiative had grown into an international organization, with offices in 12 countries and a mission to support whistleblowers and fight corruption wherever it appeared. Sophia, now 7 years old, had become something of a celebrity in legal circles. She attended a prestigious academy during the day, but continued to work alongside Rashid in their mission to expose corruption. Her father's research had become the foundation for successful prosecutions in 6 countries, and she had testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for whistleblower families. "Uncle Rashid," she called from the living room, using the title she had chosen for him after their formal adoption was finalized. "Agent Hayes is here with the new case files." Agent Hayes, who had received a commendation for her work on the Meridian case, had become the FBI's liaison to their organization. She entered with a warm smile that had become familiar over their years of partnership. "Good news," Hayes announced. "The Prague office just confirmed 3 more arrests in the Eastern European branch of the network. And the Swiss authorities have agreed to release your father's original files from their evidence storage." Sophia's eyes lit up with excitement. Her father's complete research, which had been held by various European law enforcement agencies, was finally being returned to her. It represented not just important evidence, but the legacy of a man who had died fighting for justice. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "Sirs, the United Nations has asked you both to testify at a special commission on international corruption. They want to use your case as a model for how different countries can work together to fight organized crime." Rashid looked at Sophia, who was already nodding enthusiastically. Their partnership had evolved far beyond what either of them could have imagined that first day in the courthouse. She had saved him from destruction, but he had given her the resources and platform to continue her father's work on a global scale. "We'll do it," Rashid said, "but only if Sophia gets to present her father's research herself." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Hayes replied with a grin. As evening fell over New York City, Rashid and Sophia sat together reviewing files for their next case, a corruption scandal involving infrastructure contracts in 3 different states. Their work had become more than a mission. It had become a way of life dedicated to ensuring that what had happened to both of them could never happen to others. "Do you ever wonder what Papa would think of all this?" Sophia asked, looking up from a financial document she was analyzing. "I think he would be incredibly proud," Rashid replied. "You've taken his work further than he ever could have imagined." Sophia smiled, the same fierce determination in her eyes that had first caught Rashid's attention in that courthouse corridor. "He always said that the most important thing about fighting corruption isn't winning every battle. It's making sure the fight continues. And it will, Uncle Rashid. As long as there are people willing to stand up for what's right, the fight will continue." Looking out at the city lights, Rashid knew she was right. Their story had become proof that justice could triumph over corruption, that truth could overcome lies, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could change the world. Their story didn't end in that courtroom. It began there. Today, corruption continues to threaten justice systems around the world. Innocent people are still being framed, while real criminals hide behind wealth and power. Families are still being destroyed because someone dared to speak truth to corruption. But every day, ordinary people like you make the choice to stand up for justice, just as Sophia and Rashid did. Every whistleblower who risks their career to expose wrongdoing. Every citizen who reports corruption instead of looking the other way. Every person who refuses to accept that this is just how things work. They're all continuing the fight that began with a 5-year-old girl's courage and a businessman's determination to clear his name. Your voice matters. Your choice to demand transparency and accountability matters. Your refusal to accept corruption as normal matters, because somewhere out there, another innocent person is facing false charges. Another child has lost their family to corruption. Another honest official is being pressured to look the other way. And they need to know they're not alone in this fight.